Do you believe in demons, in the unseen forces lurking around us? The Florida Exorcism Case will leave you shaken. A mother convinced she was fighting evil to save her son, only for everything to end in a tragedy that haunted an entire community. In this video, Tales Mythology takes you inside the dark house of Boon Beach, where faith, fear, and reality collided in one of America's most terrifying exorcism cases. Subscribe to Tales Mythology now to uncover more chilling true stories where myths, legends, and real-life horrors intertwine in the shadows. There are stories that crawl beneath your skin, stories that begin with faith but end in shadows. And tonight this is one of those stories. Florida, a place where sunlight gilds the beaches, where palm trees sway lazily in the wind, where the air smells of salt and oranges. A paradise, also it seems. But sometimes paradise hides the darkest of secrets. One house in Boon Beach, Florida, ordinary on the outside, beige paint peeling in the sun. A front yard where grass clings stubbornly to life became the center of a nightmare so chilling it would stain the memory of the entire community. Inside lived a woman, Rhonda Polly, a mother, a believer, a woman who thought she was at war with something unseen. And in the grip of that belief, she would cross a line from devotion into madness. What happened inside that house over the span of 12 long, feverish days would send shivers through police officers, neighbors, even hardened reporters who had seen it all. A story of faith sharpened into a weapon. A story of a mother who claimed she was saving her son even as the world watched in horror. Tonight, we are not watching a movie. This is not fiction. This is real. And once you hear what happened, you may never look at faith the same way again. Because the Florida Exorcism Case isn't just a crime, it's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the dark, they live in our minds. Stay with me if you dare. At first glance, Rhonda Polly was no different from countless single mothers across Florida. Her neighbors remembered her as polite, quiet, perhaps a little intense about her faith, but certainly nothing alarming. She attended church regularly. She volunteered during charity drives. She even led small prayer circles in her living room when neighbors dropped by. To most, she was simply devoted. But devotion has a shadow side. Psychologists have a term, religious psychosis. It doesn't appear overnight. It begins as faith. Most people recognize a prayer, fasting, Bible reading, but slowly twists when isolation, stress, or mental illness enter the equation. The rituals grow longer, the prayers more desperate, the visions more vivid. It happened to Rhonda in ways no one saw coming. Friends later recalled she had always been spiritually sensitive. She often spoke of dreams where angels whispered to her, where God sent signs through flickering candles or the flight of birds. At first, it was eccentric but harmless. After all, faith often speaks in symbols, but over time, the dreams darkened. The whispers turned to warnings. One friend remembered a chilling phone call. "There's something in the house," Rhonda said. "Something watching him." By him, she meant her 6-year-old son. Ramla boy, teachers described as bright, curious, with a smile that seemed to burst through every photograph. But to Rhonda, that smile began to look different. She told a relative she saw shadows move when he walked by, heard voices when he cried at night. Psychiatrists reviewing the case later suggested this was a classic sign of paranoid delusion, malevolent intent when none exists. But to Rhonda, it was spiritual warfare, and she was the chosen soldier. Faith versus fear. This wasn't the first time faith and delusion had danced so dangerously close. In 1976, German student Anneliese Michel died after months of exorcisms performed by priests and parents convinced she was possessed. Later studies suggested she suffered from epilepsy and psychosis, not demons. In rural communities worldwide, anthropologists have documented cases where sleep paralysis, a medical condition, was interpreted as spiritual attacks, leading to frantic exorcisms. Rhonda's story fit this tragic pattern. When belief replaces evidence, fear grows claws. Back in Boon Beach, Neighbors began hearing strange things at night. Prayers rising through open windows. Rhonda's voice cracking between fury and pleading. Words spilling out in tongues no one understood. And then, the locking of doors. The boy no longer played outside. The house grew quieter, heavier. One neighbor later told reporters, it felt like the house was closing in on itself, like it was swallowing them whole. The psychology of isolation. Experts point out something chilling. When people isolate in the grip of religious mania, their beliefs stop encountering resistance. There's no friend to say this isn't real, no doctor to explain symptoms, no pastor to intervene. The echo chamber grows louder, until only the voices in your head remain. Rhonda stopped returning calls, stopped letting relatives visit, and when she did talk, her words carried a terrifying certainty. It's not my son anymore, she whispered to one cousin. Something else is living inside him. It was this conviction, this absolute, uncheckable belief that set the stage for what happened next. Because when faith becomes weaponized by fear, it can justify anything. The night was coming, the candles would be lit, and a boy's laughter would soon fall silent forever. It was January in Boon Beach, the kind of night when the air feels thick, like it's holding its breath. Inside Rhonda Polly's small house, candles flickered on every surface, etching counters, windowsills, the narrow table in the living room. Their smoke clung to the walls like restless shadows. A Bible lay open, its pages underlined in frantic strokes, verses circled, arrows drawn toward single words: deliverance, cast out, salvation. Rhonda moved like a woman on a mission. Her face was pale from fasting, her eyes wide, fever bright. Neighbors later said they heard her chanting, her voice rising and falling in waves, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a command, words half in English, half in the rolling cadence of biblical language. And then the boy began to cry. Rammel's last moments. Rammel was only 6 years old, too young to understand why his mother kept waking him at night for long prayers, too young to understand why she whispered about demons when she looked at him. He had cried before during these rituals, but tonight felt different. He told her he was scared, told her he wanted to go back to bed, but to Rhonda, his fear wasn't fear at all. It was resistance. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon, how delusional parents can reinterpret normal child behavior as signs of possession or evil. A simple tear becomes proof of demonic influence. A restless night becomes a spiritual attack. And so, as her son trembled in the candlelight, Rhonda believed she was facing something far darker than a frightened child. The ritual. She pressed her palm to his forehead, the way she had seen pastors do on television revivals. Only this wasn't a revival tent filled with singing voices and hallelujahs. This was a locked room. She anointed him with oil until it dripped onto the floor. Her prayers grew louder, words cracking like whips in the still air. Leave him. Leave this house. You have no power here. The boy struggled, called for his mother in confusion. To Rhonda, the struggle meant the demon was fighting back. To Rammel, it was just terror, silence. It ended sometime after midnight. No one knows the exact moment when prayer turned into pressure, when deliverance turned into death. But by the time Rhonda stopped shouting, the house had fallen silent. She later told investigators she didn't believe it was her son who died that night. She claimed the demon had been cast out, that her child had been freed. But the reality was far simpler and far more horrifying. A little boy with a wide smile and curious eyes lay lifeless on the floor. The chilling calm afterward. Most crimes of passion leave chaos behind: screams, panic, desperate calls for help. But what unsettled detectives later was how calm Rhonda seemed after. She wrapped her son's body in bedsheets, placed him gently on his bed, whispered prayers over him as if tucking him in for the night, and then she left him there. For 12 days, outside, life went on as usual. Kids biked to school, neighbors waved at each other in driveways, but inside that house time had stopped, and the smell of death was about to bring everything to light. The candles burned out one by one. The house on Main Warren Road grew quieter with each passing day, but behind its closed curtains, Rhonda Polly lived with a secret tone she didn't acknowledge, even to herself. She moved through the house as if nothing had changed, cooked small meals she barely ate, read scripture aloud in the living room, sat beside the bed where her son's body lay, whispering prayers into the still air. To her, the boy wasn't dead. Not really. She told herself he was healed, that God was only keeping him in some holy sleep before sending him back. And so she waited. The psychology of denial. Experts later explained this behavior as a form of psychotic denial, desperate rewriting of reality when the truth is too heavy to carry. One psychiatrist compared it to cases where grieving parents set the dinner table for children long buried, convinced they might come home any moment. But this wasn't just grief, it was fanatic conviction. Because Rhonda didn't cry, she didn't collapse into guilt or despair. She believed she had won. The smell. By the fourth day, neighbors began noticing something strange. A smell thick, sweet, and rotting slipping from the house even through closed windows. At first, people dismissed it as maybe garbage, maybe a dead raccoon in the walls. After all, Florida heat can turn the smallest things foul. But the smell grew heavier, and there was something else. The silence. The boy, once a blur of laughter and motion, hadn't been seen in days. One neighbor recalled. I asked about him. She said he was resting. For a week. Something wasn't right. Family intervenes. Rhonda's relatives started calling. She dodged their questions. Claimed she and the boy were fasting, praying, keeping to themselves. When a cousin came to the door, Rhonda cracked it open, just enough to speak, but wouldn't let her in. That cousin told police later. Her eyes, it was like she wasn't looking at me, like she was somewhere else entirely. The breaking point. 12 days after the boy's death, another relative finally forced their way inside. What they found would haunt them forever. The candles burned to stubs, wax hardened in strange trails across the furniture, Bible pages taped to walls, verses scrawled in frantic handwriting, and in the small bedroom, the boy's body, wrapped tightly in sheets, lying as if merely asleep. Except the air told the truth the eyes didn't want to see. They ran from the house, hands shaking as they dialed 911. Police arrival. When officers entered, they expected chaos, screaming, denial, maybe even resistance. Instead, they found Rhonda sitting calmly on the couch, Bible in her lap. She didn't fight, didn't cry. She simply told them she had done God's work, that her son was free now. Even the detectives men who had seen stabbings, shootings, every kind of horror later, admitted this was different, because crime usually comes with heat, anger, greed, revenge. But this was cold, and that made it worse. The first officer on the scene later told reporters it wasn't the body that stayed with him the most. It was the silence inside that house. No frantic mother begging for forgiveness. No weeping. No panic. Just a woman sitting on her couch, hands folded over a Bible, watching them as if they were the intruders. She spoke softly, even politely, as she told them what she had done. The demon fought me, she said, but I was stronger. God made me stronger. Evidence of obsession. As detectives moved through the rooms, they found more than just a crime scene. Walls scrawled with verses in thick black marker. The Lord commands deliverance. Candles melted into puddles of wax, some arranged in circles. Notebooks filled with frantic handwriting prayers, commands, warnings written as if someone was racing against time. One investigator described it as part crime scene, part chapel, part diary of a mind unraveling. Neighbors in shock. Outside, neighbors gathered in stunned silence behind the police tape. They whispered about the prayers they'd heard at night, the boy they hadn't seen in nearly 2 weeks, the smell they had tried to ignore. One man shook his head as cameras rolled. We thought she was just religious. I never imagined this. The media storm. By the next morning, headlines screamed across Florida. Florida Exorcism Case shocks Boon Beach. News vans lined the street. Reporters leaned over fences, filming the beige house now sealed with yellow tape. It wasn't just local news anymore. The story leapt to national channels, morning shows, Even late-night hosts who spoke the words exorcism and Florida with the same disbelief reserved for ghost stories. But this wasn't a ghost story. A child was dead, and a mother claimed she had saved him. Psychological profiles begin. Detectives brought in psychiatrists almost immediately. They needed to understand what they were dealing with. Was Rhonda mentally ill, delusional from isolation and fasting? Or was this something darker, something courts would struggle to define? One expert noted the classic signs of religious psychosis: auditory hallucinations, delusions of divine mission, complete lack of remorse. Another compared her case to mothers. Undocumented filicide by religious delusions study are rare, but catastrophic incidents where belief and paranoia are twisted into violence. But even among seasoned professionals, there was unease, because Rhonda didn't fit the image of a wild-eyed fanatic. She was calm, composed, almost proud. Rhonda's arrest. When officers led her from the house, she didn't resist. Neighbors watched as she stepped into the squad car with the pose of someone heading to Sunday service rather than jail. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you regret what you did?" She turned her head slightly toward the cameras. "I freed him," she said simply. It was this composure, serene conviction on her facet that would haunt the courtroom in the weeks to come. Because the trial wasn't just about what happened, it was about why, and whether faith itself could be put on trial. The courtroom in Boon Beach wasn't built for stories like this. It was built for burglary cases, custody battles, maybe the occasional bar fight gone wrong. But now, it stood under a storm of cameras, reporters, and protesters holding signs on both sides, some demanding justice for the boy, others insisting Rhonda had done God's will. Inside, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Rhonda's entrance. When Rhonda Polly appeared, shackled at the wrists, the room fell silent. Reporters scribbled furiously. She didn't look like a killer. She didn't look like someone who had spent nearly 2 weeks in a house with her son's lifeless body. She looked calm, serene. Some said later that this was the most unsettling thing of all, that she wore the expression of someone certain she was right. Prosecution versus defense. The prosecution spoke first, voices clipped and sharp. They described the candles, the prayers, the neighbors hearing screams. They showed photographs of the crime scene, verses on the walls, the boy's body wrapped in sheets. They called it ritualistic murder disguised as religion. The defense countered with a different story. They called psychiatrists who testified about religious psychosis cases where people hallucinate divine voices or feel commanded by God to perform acts no sane mind would justify. They spoke of isolation, stress, and untreated mental illness, painting Rhonda as a woman abandoned by the system, not possessed by demons. Rhonda speaks, but Rhonda herself became the trial's most haunting witness. When asked if she understood the charges, she nodded calmly. When asked if she regretted her actions, she looked straight at the jury and said, "Would you regret pulling your child from a fire? Would you regret cutting a snake off his body? I saved him. You only see the flesh. I saw the spirit." Her words chilled the room. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Reporters wrote furiously, because this wasn't the rambling of someone confused or ashamed. This was conviction, faith on trial. The judge kept reminding everyone, this is a court of law, not a church. But it didn't feel that way. Outside, pastors held vigils. Some prayed for Rhonda, others prayed for justice. Inside, witnesses spoke of dreams she claimed to have, of voices she swore guided her, of nights where she told friends angels stood by her bed urging her to fight. Psychologists called it delusion, believers called it spiritual warfare, and the jury sat trapped between two religious zones built of evidence, one built of faith. The chilling details. One officer recalled Rhonda describing the night in calm detail, how the demon fought back, how she held her son down so it couldn't escape through his eyes, how she felt the presence leave when he stopped breathing. She spoke without trembling, as if retelling a victory. The courtroom air grew colder with each word. By the end of the trial, it wasn't just a case anymore. It was a question hanging over everyone in that room. Was this madness, or did Rhonda Polly truly believe she had saved her son from something darker than anyone could see. When the gavel fell and the trial ended, most people thought the story would fade with time. But it didn't. It couldn't. Because some stories don't stay locked in court transcripts, they linger. The verdict: Rhonda Polly was found guilty. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read. No tears, no protest. Even as she was led away in handcuffs, she carried the same serene expression she'd worn from the beginning, like a woman who still believed she had done holy work. One reporter swore he saw her smile faintly as she disappeared through the courthouse doors. The house on Maynorn Road, the house where it all happened, became a thing of whispers. New tenants moved in and moved out within weeks. Some claimed they heard footsteps at night when the rooms were empty. Others spoke of flickering lights, strange smells, and the feeling of being watched. Eventually, the house stood abandoned, curtains drawn tight, weeds creeping up through the cracks in the driveway. Kids on bikes crossed the street to avoid it. Neighbors stopped looking at it altogether. One local pastor told reporters, "Some places feel empty when tragedy strikes. That house doesn't feel empty. It feels crowded." The boy's grave. At the cemetery, people left flowers for Rammel, but over time, the offerings grew. Stranger candles arranged in circles, crude wooden crosses, even salt lines poured carefully around the headstone. Police occasionally cleared the items away, but they always came back. Some said it was superstition. Others said it was fear. Rhonda in prison. Then there were the prison rumors. Guards whispered about nights when Rhonda refused to sleep, kneeling on the cold concrete floor, chanting scripture for hours. Other inmates claimed she spoke to someone unseen, pausing to listen before nodding as if receiving instructions. One guard swore he passed her cell one night and saw her standing motionless, face pressed to the glass, eyes wide and unblinking, a smile stretched too far across her face. When he came back minutes later, she was on her knees again, praying softly. The prison chaplain visited her weekly, at first out of duty, later out of concern. He told reporters later, her faith wasn't comforting. It was sharp, dangerous, like a blade she was holding by the wrong end. She told him once she had no regrets, that her work wasn't finished, that there were more demons to cast out. The growing legend. Within a year, the Boon Beach exorcism had left the courtroom and entered folklore. Paranormal investigators filmed the empty house, claiming to capture whispers and cold spots. Online forums debated whether Rhonda had been mentally ill or spiritually attacked. Podcasts turned the case into a true crime meets ghost story sensation, and the line between reality and legend blurred more each year. Some called it madness. Others swore the house was cursed. A few even claimed Rhonda had been right all along, that she had fought something dark and paid the price. But beneath the rumors and the ghost stories, one truth remained. A boy was gone. A mother had crossed a line she could never return from. And the rest was speculation dressed as faith. The Boon Beach exorcism began with faith, but it ended with silence, death, and questions that have no easy answers. Where faith ends and fanaticism begins. Psychologists call it religious delusion when faith crosses into hallucinations and paranoia. Theologians call it spiritual deception when belief twists into something unrecognizable. But to neighbors, to reporters, to the jurors who watched Rhonda Polly speak about demons and angels with the calmness of a Sunday sermon, it felt like something darker than either word could hold. Because how do you label a tragedy where a mother believes she's saving her child, even as she takes his life? Where do you draw the line between devotion and danger? The lesson in the horror. This story forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Faith can comfort, but it can also blind. Love can protect, but it can also destroy when twisted by fear. And sometimes, the scariest monsters are not in the shadows or under the bed, but in the human mind when reality itself begins to fracture. The Boon Beach exorcism isn't just a story about a crime. It's a mirror, one that makes us ask, if belief can justify this, what else can it justify? They say children hear whispers when they ride by on their bikes, and in prison, Rhonda Polly, years older, still reads her Bible every day. She still tells visitors she saved her son, that she was right all along. Maybe that's why this story lingers. Because if she was wrong, then it was madness. But if she was right, then the real horror didn't end in that house. It might still be waiting. So, as you turn off the lights tonight, remember this. The Boon Beach exorcism isn't just about one mother in Florida. It's about how fragile our grip on reality can be, how faith can become fire, and how sometimes the scariest stories don't end when the credits roll. Because this one will follow you home.